Happy Hypocrite. This is a story for people like yourselves who've made a retreat or made a prayer group who said, I'm going to change. I'm really going to change. You've made a good resolution and you've started. And for 2 or 3 weeks, it's easy enough to keep your good resolution. Then what happens? You hear a voice. It's just a little voice whispering in your ear. And I have to tell you, it is not the voice of your conscience. It's the voice of someone else. It's a voice that says, don't be a hypocrite. Come off it. Don't try to be any better than you really can be. Just be your old self. Don't worry about these fancy resolutions. That's a temptation. It is not the truth. And I'd like to tell you a story. In fact, it's a story within a story. It's a story about a great American actor, John Barrymore, one of the finest actors who was ever on the American stage. He took all of these great parts. He was called the great profile. And then towards the end of his life, he fell into trouble. He drank too much. He couldn't get jobs on the stage. He did radio shows. And not long before he died, if I got my facts correctly, not long before he died, he did this show, The Happy Hypocrite, on radio. When he died, he had a very happy death. There was a priest came to him. He made his peace with God. And I've often thought that just maybe it was the happy hypocrite, the story that gave him the happy ending. And so if you've got a good imagination and you can think back to the days when radio was all we had, we didn't have any television, just imagine you're sitting before the dials and you're hearing this story, John Barrymore in The Happy Hypocrite. When people wanted to say something nice about Sir George Hell, they said he never smoked big black cigars. That was about the only nice thing you could say about Sir George Hell. He lived in Merry England when knighthood was in Dutch. He had this black beard, this unkempt face, all of the vices that a man could have showed in his face. But more than that, he had this steed, this ugly horse called Black Devil. And he rode Black Devil along the roads in England a good deal faster than the legitimate speed limit. And he rode on the right side of the road, which is the wrong side of the road in England. And then there was this about Sir George Hell. He didn't slay dragons. Oh no. Sir George had this little orphanage in which he would take dragons when they were young dragons and raise them up until they were ready to go out and blast their smoke and fire and strike terror in the countryside. And when the hoofs of Black Devil, that was the name of his horse, when the hoofs of Black Devil sounded on the countryside, all the women, the mothers gathered in their children. They were afraid of Sir George Hell. Act 1. Sir George is riding along one of the country roads of England on the right side of the road, which is the wrong side of the road in England, far too fast for the countryside, the speed limit. And suddenly, he stops. He's smitten. He's smitten where he would keep his big black cigars, except you remember he didn't smoke them. They're dangerous for his health. Sir George is smitten because he hears the voice of this lovely princess. She's singing a song, "Oh, I wish I had someone to love me, someone to call me my own." And Sir George rides towards the sound of that voice. He rides towards the general direction of the sunrise. There, he crosses a moat. There's a castle there, with this moat and the drawbridge, and of course the varlet, that is the servant there with the pike on guard. But Sir George throws him into the moat. That was the way Sir George did things. Rides right into the courtyard of the castle and looks up, and he sees on the balcony the lovely princess. Well, there was nothing very slow about Sir George Hell. He raised his visor, he didn't bother to dismount, and looked up and said, "Fair princess, may I have thy hand in marriage?" Well, the princess wasn't too slow herself, and she looked down from her balcony and she said, "My hand? Thou mayest not have my little finger. I know whom thou art Sir George Hell. Begone!" Nobody had ever spoken to Sir George Hell like that before. But something inside, whatever it was, made him act differently. He rode away. He bewent, which is the past tense of the verb to be gone. He went and he rode slowly out over the drawbridge, along the road, this time within the legal speed limit. And that was how he happened to see a sign along the edge of the road, which made him think. He ran his long, bony fingers through the mane of Black Devil as he read that sign, which said, "Does she or does she not? Only her hairdresser knows." Well, Black Devil, the horse, could read his master's mind. And so the horse turned and said to Sir George Hell, "Nay, nay." But Sir George Hell said, "Yea, verily, forsooth." He rode on a little farther, and there was a lane that led off to the left side, which is the right side of the road in England, led off to the left side of the road, and above was a sign, "Hazel, the hairdresser." So he went in to see Hazel. He dismounted, raised his visor. "Fair hairdresser," quoth he, unquote, couldst thou change this steed of mine into a blonde? They seem to have so much more fun." And so he tethered the horse, and she said, "I will die for you." She spelled it D-Y-E, of course. And so she proceeded with the paint pots to change Black Devil into a blonde. And then he passed his hand over his own face, and he said, "And canst thou do something for this ugly puss of mine?" Well, she tried. She gave him a shave, which wasn't much of an improvement. And then she got an idea. She took some plasticine and she fashioned a mask which made him look young and strong and brave and vigorous, and all the things that he really wanted to be. He looked at himself in the mirror. Well, he said, "Sir George Hell? No more Sir George Hell. I want Sir George Heaven. And thou, my steed," looking at the horse who was coming out in all his painted glory, "no longer Black Devil. Hi-O Silver, away!" And as they rode away, you heard the William Tell overture in the background. Back he went then in the general direction of the sunrise, back along the road, only this time he knew he would have to live the kind of life he was showing in his mask, in his face. And so he rode on the left side of the road, which is the right side of the road in England, at the speed limit. And that was how he happened to see this poor little Indian along there. He said, "Lo, the poor Indian." And the Indian said, "Me no lo, me tanto. Can you fix pinto pronto?" Well, Sir George knew what he could do there. He pulled out his knife, sharp knife, took the stone out of the foot of the pinto pronto, and he said to Tanto, "Tanto, will thou follow me wherever I go?" "And me follow you, Kimosabi," said Tanto pronto. And he never did tell him really what Kimosabi meant, and I don't know either. Back they went then, towards the sunrise, towards the moat now, towards the castle. There, sure enough, the varlet has gotten himself out of the watery moat, and he's standing there. He's putting some 3-in-1 oil on his greaves so he can flex them up a little bit. Sir George rides right past. There's the princess on the balcony. He looks up. This time, however, he raises his visor, dismounts, and makes a courtly bow. "Fair princess, may I have thy hand in marriage?" Maybe the second time it'd be allowed. "Ah, and what may thy name be, sire?" "Sir George Heaven, at your service, ma'am." "Ah, Sir George Heaven, a goodly knight. I will give you something to do, a mission to essay for me. My sire would greatly desire that thou and thy squire would go to yonder shire and kill 3 creditors. Bring them back if you can, if thou art the knight thou pretendest to be. Bring back yon 3 creditors who hold this castle in deadly thrall. Bring them back with thy spear." 3 creditors with 1 spear, said he pointedly. "A difficult task, but I shall essay it. Hi-O Silver, away!" Out across the drawbridge, and they made a sharp right turn to right in the general direction of the North Pole. And on they went. The woods got deeper and darker and danker all the time. And pretty soon they could go no farther, and suddenly they heard a sound which would make a stout-hearted man quail, or pheasant if you prefer. The sound was more like a locomotive than anything else. But it wasn't a locomotive. It was a dragon belching forth smoke and steam and fire from his deadly nostrils. But Sir George Hell paused, and suddenly the dragon paused too, for the dragon recognized him. This was one of those dragons that Sir George had raised from the orphanage, raised until they would be dragons. And the dragon loved his master, and the dragon wasn't fooled by all this paint and varnish and all the makeup. So he snuggled up close to Sir George Hell, and at that very moment Sir George knew what he would do. He drew out his trusty spear. He rammed it at the fiery throat of the dragon, and at that very instant, Tonto pulled out his panchromatic XXXZ and took the picture that has become famous in song and story, George and the Dragon. Onward they went, into the forest, deeper and darker and danker. And finally they could go no farther. Sir George turned to Tonto, and said to him, Kimosabi, no, he's supposed to say Kimosabi, canst thou go ahead and reconnoiter? Reconnoiter, Kimosabi? Me don't know what that means. Oh, it's one of them new words that the French brought in, the Norman conquest, you've heard of that. Go ahead and take a look around. Tonto went forward and came back in a very short time. He came back with kind of a sad, dejected face. He said, Kimosabi, I have bad news, and I have bad news. Ahead is deep chasm. We must cross chasm to get to the other side where creditors are. Little boat at the bottom. Across top of chasm is bridge, rope bridge, with bicycle on it. Kimosabi, I don't like the looks of the boat, but I think, Kimosabi, yon bark is worse than yon bike. This didn't stop him. Sir George, again, knew what he would do. Act 2. Now they go down along the edge of the boat, and they see this ferry boat man, the one who runs the boat, who pulls it across, Charon. And Charon, the old ferry boat man, says, I tell you, many have gone across, and no one has ever come back to tell the tale. Sir George pauses. The punt of no return, he says. But even that will not stop him. Take me across, Charon. And so singing, row, row, row your boat. Charon takes them across the stream. They get to the other side of the stream. Sir George looks around. He sees some movement behind 3 distinct trees. And his suspicions are aroused. And suddenly he calls out, Avast, yon creditors, come out from behind yon trees and face me like a man or men, whichever you are. And the 3 creditors come out. Something of the old Sir George Hell is inside of Sir George Heaven. And as he sees them, he lines them up and he goes pop, crackle, snap, right through with the spear. And sure enough, these 3 cereal manufacturers are doomed. Back they come. Now the spell is broken. The river will take them back across. And Charon punts them across just the way he always wanted to. And they return to the other side. They come back now through the woods, which seem to open up as if by magic before them. And they come back. There they are. Act 3. They come to the castle. It is the afternoon, the hour of siesta. The entire castle is fast asleep. No longer is the princess on the balcony, but there, sure enough, is the varlet. There he is in all his glory with his pike, and he raises his finger to his lips. He doesn't want to disturb the sleeping castle. And he says, shh. And acting on a sudden inspiration, Sir George says, kebab. And that does it. Shish kebab. That's the magic word that breaks the spell. Suddenly everybody in the castle awakes. The lovely princess comes down and she says, shish kebab, that did it. Throw yon creditors into yon moat and come in and have some real shish kebab. That's what they do. Around the fire that evening, they're all happily gathered. Sir George has eaten shish kebab as well as he could. It's difficult to eat shish kebab if you're wearing a tight-fitting mask. But he tried it, and he did it, and he succeeded. And he thought to himself, 3rd time's lucky. So turning to the princess with another courtly bow, he said, now, fair princess, may I have thy hand in marriage? And she, in her best Middle English, replied, yea, verily, forsooth. Act 4. There's a lovely chapel in the woods there, not too far from the castle. The chapel is adorned with flowers and leafy boughs. The bride is waiting in the vestibule with her father, her shaking father. The old man is just a little bit nervous, more nervous than she is. In the sacristy, the priest is having his troubles. They've just gone over to the new Gregorian Missal. He's trying to find the place. Sir George, of course, where the bridegroom should be, is in the sacristy with the best man, who naturally is Tonto. I got it right this time, not Pronto, but Tonto. The only trouble is that Tonto has worn a new suit of chainmail, and the ring has gotten caught in the chainmail. Sir George is saying, "Pronto, Tonto, me no happy, you no happy, make with the ring." Back in the sacristy then, in the vestibule rather, the bride is speaking to her father. She's saying, "Now look, Dad, don't take it so hard. You're not losing a daughter. You're getting a couple of good nags." Because out in the parking lot, which is beginning to fill with the Mavericks and Mustangs, the tall, stalwart figure of Silver looks a little bit black around the roots by this time. Silver is standing out, and of course, the Pinto is still standing out. It's a happy scene as the bride comes up the aisle, and her father takes his seat after she sort of deposits him in the seat, and Sir George is standing there, maybe no heavy, you know heavy, make with the ring. They're still trying to get at the ring. When suddenly a dark shadow comes across, a shadow of a villainess, looks like a witch riding a P-38 broom. She makes one immoment turn, and then she looks down and she sees the parking lot, and she sees Silver. "That looks like one of my jobs," she cackles to herself. "That looks like one of my jobs." Another turn. "That is one of my jobs," she cackles, and she makes a perfect three-broom landing. And then, because she's a witch and she wants to spoil everybody's fun, she looks in and she sees what's happening. There's just a little bit of confusion there now. Oh, the priest has finally found the place, but Sir George is still trying to get the ring out of the chainmail. And the bride is standing there waiting, and the father is weeping. This is her chance. This is the chance she's waited for. And so she sneaks in and comes up along the sides of the pews and comes across just as the priest begins the ceremony. "And now," he says, "if there are any in this church who know aught why these two should not be wed, let him now speak, or else forever after hold his peace." That very moment, when everyone's attention is focused on the bride and groom, the wicked witch, can you guess who she is? We have all the clues. Remember, he went away from the east. He went towards the west. Remember the hairdresser? You've got it. Witch Hazel, that's who she is. Witch Hazel, the wicked witch of the west. And now she's going to wreak her vengeance on the unsuspecting Sir George Heaven, or Sir George Hell, because she points a long bony finger and she cackles, "That's not Sir George Heaven, that's Sir George Hell." Before anyone can stop her, she claws the mask from his face. Well, it's only an allegory. It's only a story. And whether it was the transformation or whether it was the love of his bride that did it, but when she looked on him, his face was more beautiful than any mask. And that's the story. That's the story of the happy hypocrite. Because I think there are two kinds of hypocrites. There's the bad kind, the kind that Jesus denounced, the kind who isn't good inside and doesn't want to be good, the kind who's putting on a mask but never really changes. And there's the happy hypocrite who acts maybe better than he feels like acting, who acts good to try to lift himself up to that ideal. I think there's some of that happy hypocrite in all of us. I really do. I think we're all wearing a mask. I don't believe any one of us is as good or kind or sweet or noble or gentle as we'd like people to think they are. I don't believe that. But I do believe this too. Someday, when you and I stand before the God who made us, When we stand in the presence of the judge who loved us enough to die for us, and when the devil comes and tries to snatch the mask from our faces, if we really lived what we believed or tried to live up to it, then your face, and mine too, please God, will be more beautiful than any mask.